This is some carbon fiber strands, and this is a 5 shilling coin, and together I'm gonna turn these things into one of the most insane rings I have ever made. But how do I get these fibers into some form that's actually usable? How do I turn this coin into something that's shaped more like a ring? Where on earth does the gold come from? And what makes this ring one of the most incredible things I have ever made? The answer might surprise you. Forged carbon fiber is a process where instead of using a traditional mat where carbon is woven, we use individual fibers and a compression mold and some resin. So step 1 is going to be to print out a mold. I'm using a simple compression mold for this, and I'm using a low viscosity resin to ensure that the carbon goes to all the different crevices of the mold. I'm mixing up some resin, and I'm getting it obviously thoroughly mixed, and I'm going to start laying it inside the mold. Now this is quite a small mold, and so I'm going to use a stick to sort of push in the fibers. Normally you'd use a really small paintbrush, but I think I'm just going to use a stick because it's much easier. I've actually done this process many times before, and it took me a long time to get it dialed in perfectly. For these simple shapes, it's not much of an issue, but for stuff like watch cases, it takes about 5 and 10 times just to get the right proportions, to make sure my tolerances are correct so that the two parts close properly. I'm shoving in all the fibers here, and when it starts off, it's quite stray. The fibers tend to protrude quite a bit, and it's difficult to get it to lay out nicely. But after a while you should be left with something similar like this, and this is the moment where you can close the lid and you can start compressing the mold. Here you can see the mold before it gets compressed, and I'm going to be using a piece of wood on top just to make sure that the pressure is consistent as I compress the mold. I'm doing it really slowly to make sure that as I press it down, all the resin has time to escape, because if you don't, it's gonna just crack the mold and you're gonna have to restart. I'm now gonna demold it about 12 hours later, and I'm breaking open the mold, and usually you just make a 3-part mold instead of a 2-part mold so that you can just reuse the molds, but in this case it's a very small part, so I'm not really concerned about wasting any plastic. And I'm also using PLA, which is very fragile, so it's easy for me to actually crack it open. Here you can see the first look at the actual ring, and I'm not quite sure if this is the carbon or if this is the plastic, so I'm testing it out using a black light, and it looks pretty insane. I'm just gonna work my way slowly around and get the ring released from the mold. It's cast in a much thicker shape than it should be, because I'm gonna just remove the material afterwards. It's a bit easier and a bit more forgiving if you add material to the mold itself. Instead of making it really thin, you add material and then grind out the excess later. So here's the part all out of the mold, and you can see that epic glow in the dark. Moving on to the coin, I want to essentially create a shoulder on this coin that will allow me to inlay the carbon over that. It's a bit tricky to understand now, but I'm starting off by drilling a hole inside the coin, and I'm going to use this hole to push out the material towards the inside of the ring to create sort of a ledge. You'll see and understand it a bit better once I show you. The idea is that we're going to turn this ring slightly inside out. Now you get proper coin smithing tools, and it's actually a very important jeweler's tool, which I do have, but I haven't used it in like 5 years, so it's kind of rusty. So instead I'm going to make do with a socket and some end pipes, and I just ground out a small radius on the socket, and I'm going to use this end cap to place against it, and I'm going to hammer on it to form it into the shape. It's kind of ghetto, but it works, trust me. I'm annealing this coin by heating it up to red hot and then quenching it in some water. This will soften it and make it a bit easier to handle. As I started hammering on it, I can basically create the inside edge, which will be where the carbon sits on. So I'm starting off softly and I'm giving it a few gentle whacks just to get the inside edge out, and you'll be able to see it in a few seconds. So there you can see the lip that's starting to form. That's the shoulder that I was talking about earlier. I won't be able to get it perfectly square, so I'm going to get it long enough, which should be around 5.8. Yeah, that's perfectly long enough for my purposes. And I'm going to start flattening it out just by whacking it on this end cap a bit, just to make sure that the surface is flat. That way I can grind the shoulder to be square. It'll be a lot easier than trying to get it perfectly square just by forging it. I'm removing some of the excess material on the sides with the bench grinder, and I'm gonna then start squaring up the inside. So here's where I'm at. I've got most of the material removed. I need to start squaring up the inside, but in the meantime I'm going to make another one so that I can show you how it's gonna fit together. So you can see that on this piece those two are going to meet up, and on the middle is going to be where the carbon is going to sit. Now it's time to finally square out the inside. This is quite a tedious process because I have to slowly go back and forth to make sure that I get the perfect fit. I'm also using a Dremel to make sure that the interior corner of the ring is slightly indented. That way, if there is any gap, the carbon is going to cover it. It is a bit difficult to explain, but I think you'll figure it out once I start gluing up the ring. So here that I've got it squared up slightly, you can see where the carbon is going to sit. Now it's time to actually get that carbon to fit inside the ring. I'm going to use the Dremel to slowly remove some material from the inside, that way it can slip over that shoulder that it is ground in. I've removed quite a bit of material now, and I'm going to set it in place and slowly start refining the shape to get the perfect fit. If you like these videos, consider subscribing. It really helps. Don't forget to leave a like. Thanks. Here you can see it mostly fitting. I've just got to do some refinement off camera and it will be the perfect fit. Instead of soldering this ring, which would essentially burn the carbon fiber off, I'm going to use some industrial high strength epoxy to fit all the parts together. This stuff is really high strength and I've used it multiple times before and it's never ever failed. I'm putting a decent amount on all the edges. I'm also dyeing it black, that way in case some of it does show, you won't really notice it with the carbon. I'm also covering the entire ring with epoxy to fill in any small holes that may appear. Here you can see me grinding off the excess epoxy and it's going to reveal the actual final ring, and after this we can move on to finishing. But it's starting to look really good. This ring looks incredible already, and I'm actually going to have it plated and it's gonna look pretty incredible, so just stay until the end to see why it just looks so good. I'm finishing off the inside by starting off sanding with 120 grit and moving up to 2000 grit and then buffing it with some diamond compounds. I'm doing a similar thing to finish the outside of the ring. I'm just sanding it up to 600 grit, cleaning it and getting it ready for plating. So here is the final ring before plating. The glow on this ring looks incredible, and when I sent it for plating, I initially intended for the outside to only be plated in gold, but for some strange reason, the outside of the carbon also plated in gold, which made the most insane effect. This ring turned out absolutely insane, and I couldn't have hoped for a better result. So if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I will see you on the next one.